obviously so many people here to talk about OER. So I guess we'll do introductions first. We have 2 in-person speakers and 1 virtual speaker. So Chucky, and us three there. Okay. So hi, my name is Rachel Borchardt. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian, and part of my role in the library is helping raise awareness and assisting folks who are interested in implementing OER in their classroom. I'll try and have a good David.
I am David Jacobs. I teach in COGOT and teach business ethics and some AI courses as well. I can be here on and off for a number of years. So good morning. It's nice to see you.
And we are joined virtually by Dr. Jim Quirk. Come say hello.
Everybody, I'm Jim Quirk. I teach in SPA government, and I'm delighted that Rachel was able to help me this way. So thanks, everyone.
I'm so sorry. I totally forgot about the mic, but I'll use it. All right. So just to start off with what OER is, I think this was in the program description, but it is one of those terms that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So generally speaking, it's designed to be openly accessible materials for a course. And this can be a variety of educational resources. Most commonly, OER is associated with a textbook that is freely available online for students to use. But it also can be a variety of other materials such as syllabi, slides, journal articles, or other materials, videos that you may want to use as part of a course. What makes OER OER are what we call the 5 Rs. So it's materials that have specific properties that are given to them that allow the instructor to use them in different ways. So the first R is reuse. So these materials can be reused by other people. The second one is that they can be retained. So that means I could download a copy legally. Every student can download a copy legally. Revise means that I can adjust it however I want. I don't have to use it in its original form. Remix means I can take parts of it and add it to something else to create something new. And finally, redistribute means I can take those materials and also share those materials with other people. So this is really designed to be something that you not only take and use, but ideally then pass on to other people so that others can experience the benefits of your OER work. So syllabi are kind of the baseline when it comes to redistributing, but can also go all the way up to I have created my own educational materials that I want to share with other people. And we'll be looking at lots of examples of that. So that said, when we use the term OER, people tend to substitute the larger term free, right? My students don't have to pay to access it. And for the purposes of anyone who is thinking about adopting OER, totally fine to interchange those. The library tends to take the position of if you're reducing costs for your students, it's a good thing, whether what you are giving to them technically qualifies as OER or not. So OER is a subset of a larger free for the student to access materials. Some examples of things that are free to access but are not OER, many things that you will find online. For example, a TED Talk does actually not have the necessary permissions to be considered OER, but I know they're popular, they're used, they're free for students. Library-owned resources, absolutely we encourage use of this, right? So if there are book chapters, journal articles, other resources that we own and subscribe to, sure, you should use them with your class as long as you're linking to them correctly so that we maintain our copyright status under fair use, which you can always ask library course reserves if you have issues or have concerns. So it means we aren't sharing the entirety of a book in it with an entire class if it's under copyright, but we can share a chapter. And those are just copyright things. Womp womp. And yeah, course reserves as well. But again, to be considered OER, it needs to have the sufficient licensing permissions to do those 5 Rs. So what does that look like in terms of licenses? I know, come for the OER, stay for the exciting copyright talks. But really, when we talk about OER, copyright is a big part of it, unfortunately, because whoever creates material has ownership of that material and they get to decide when and how people can use it and under what circumstances. We have definitely gotten away from that in the age of the internet because we're so used to accessing things online. But often those are still under copyright, and all we can do is access them. We don't necessarily have permission to distribute them, to adapt them, right? It's just stuff people do. If you think about copying an image that you found, Melissa knows this very well. She and I have taught art history students about the fun of taking images that you found online and using them for your own work. It's surprisingly difficult to figure out. So there's something called Creative Commons licenses that give people who own copyright of their materials an easy way to express how other people can interact and use their works. So there's a number of different Creative Commons licenses that are listed on the right-hand side, and I don't want to bore you with all of the details. But essentially, what all of them do is give the owner permission to use them in various contexts without having to ask the owner. And then there's different restrictions that can be placed. So for example, the NC is the little, it might be a little too small for you guys to see, but there's a $sign that's crossed out, which means you can use this material, but you can't sell the material. Okay, so it can't be used for a direct commercial purpose. We are using for educational purposes. So if it has the BY NC, those middle two or the last one, it's fine. The ones that make it not OER are the ones with the little equal sign, ND, which stands for non-derivative. That means you cannot remix or recreate this material. You have to use it as is. And if you think about the case of, say, a textbook, you may want to take some chapters of that textbook, but you don't necessarily want to use the whole thing in your class, right? Maybe you want to take a chapter here, a chapter there. If something has an ND license, you are not authorized to do that legally. Okay, you'd have to put it as a separate, here's the whole textbook, but I only want you to read chapter 5, instead of just grabbing chapter 5 and presenting it. Does that make sense? Okay, that said, copyright is really a very big, messy thing until it comes to court. So in general, I wouldn't be too worried if you are doing these practices, but this is what the Creative Commons licenses are designed to convey. Okay, so if it has the ND, it is not technically OER, but you should still feel encouraged to use it in a way that's appropriate. There are also other permissions that can be set that are not Creative Commons licenses. A good example is the British government does not use Creative Commons licensing, but will have text talking about ways in which you can use their government materials that are essentially very similar to a Creative Commons license. So if you happen to be assigning some parliamentary papers, sorry, I'm not a history or a politics person, you can do so even though it doesn't have a CC license specifically. There are also many things that are in the public domain. We get to celebrate another year of things going into public domain. Yay. There are different ways for things to be free and freely usable. There's also open source materials, right, that have no restrictions on use. And you won't always know that, but that's why a CC license makes it very clear, right? So look for the CC license and that will give you assurance, but that doesn't mean you can't use it if it doesn't. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Whew. And honestly, at the end of the day, you're probably not going to get sued if you get it wrong, and working with library reserves to make sure that you are not breaking copyright and fair use is the way to go. Otherwise, if there is stuff you find online, you want your students to access it, feel confident. It's just not OER and that's fine. Okay? You with me? Cool. Sorry, it's a very weird, confusing. All right, so to find OER, which again are those educational materials with an appropriate Creative Commons license, usually designed for educational purposes specifically, there are a number of different resources and platforms that are cropping up everywhere to help facilitate the discovery of appropriate materials. One of the big myths about OER is that they're hard to find and don't exist for many topics. And increasingly, we are finding many topics have appropriate OER textbooks, though the more specialized your topic is, the less likely you are to hit the jackpot and find that one great resource that's going to match your entire course needs. And our two faculty will talk much more about that since both of their courses were a more cobbled together approach rather than I'm taking one textbook and adopting it for my course. There is no one pathway to adopting OER, but the simplest case is I find a great textbook and I replace my current textbook with it. So these platforms can help facilitate that. And these slides should be up on the CTRL website. So all the links you can access. The Open Textbook Library is one of the best ones just for finding textbooks, along with OpenStax and LibreTexts. I have had really good luck just Googling OER and some keywords. So OER and AI, artificial intelligence, it found me some of the books that you ended up using as part of your courses. And if you're not sure, librarians can help. That's part of what we do, right, is find appropriate materials. And essentially, we can send you a list and be like, why don't you try looking at these and seeing how well they meet your needs. One of the other nice things about the Open Textbook Library is that they have reviews from other people who have adopted those textbooks and what they found to be the strengths and weaknesses of those resources. All right, so some benefits of using OER. For faculty, you know that all of your students will have the materials they need starting on day one. You don't have people who are waiting the first week or two to commit to buying a textbook. Excuse me, especially if you have reading assignments during the first week of class. It is part of inclusive pedagogy, which I know is part of when you are putting together a file at AU. Teaching excellence includes inclusive pedagogy. So saying, I have adopted OER is something that is really great to include in a file that shows that you're caring about your students, you're thinking about your class. It demonstrates compassion and it builds a connection with students. I have some data to support that. It's not just me saying it. And as I mentioned, it is adaptable. So whatever your course needs, you can adapt it to fit your own needs. For students, obviously, the course cost is what they talk about first and foremost. But there are other indicators that OER helps your students in different ways. We have had instructors talk about how they feel more comfortable participating in class because it's more easy for them to complete the assignments, the homework. Sorry. Which also contributes to their ability to complete the class and pass the class. All good signs, right? And it also means that they can access the materials after the course is over. So it does contribute to lifelong learning. Okay, I'm going to take a break. So there was an SPA undergraduate student who took on OER as her special senior class project and did a survey as part of that. And so she surveyed 73 undergraduates and asked them some questions about their experience with OER at AU. Starting with, are you able to afford textbooks? 25% of the students said yes. 34 said yes, 25% said no. And the biggest response was yes, but I have to take a job to afford it. I pirate these materials. I rent my textbook instead of buying, right? So they're taking lots of steps to be able to afford these materials. Another myth is that we at AU have privileged students for whom this is not a concern, and this data shows otherwise. This is absolutely a priority for our students. When asked, is AU doing enough to support students who are struggling to afford textbooks? 3% of them said yes. That was 2 of them. 81% said no, with varying degrees of vehemence, and then 16% weren't sure. Some of the quotes: I believe that AU does not care at all about how much people waste in books. Sorry, I feel bad reporting this. Using OER makes professors' teaching unique and meaningful. And I feel like the professors who use OER are on our side. So both some negative and some positive reactions straight from our students. In terms of supporting, I've already mentioned this is part of my job. So if anyone is interested in getting started with OER, usually my first step is to ask you more about the materials you're currently using and try to pull together some materials for evaluation to see if they might be a good fit for your class. But feel free to come to me with whatever your need might be. I do also tap our subject specialists who can also facilitate with finding appropriate materials. We also, at the consortium level, we have a DC library consortium of all the DC area academic libraries. We have a committee that's focused on this issue. We do monthly webinars on different topics within OER. So we have 3 coming up in the spring that you can find at open.wrlc.org. We're also hosting 2 forums that are coming up in just a few weeks. Jen will actually be facilitating one of those forums where people who have gone through the process of adopting OER for the classrooms are going to talk about their experiences. So those should be really interesting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and I'm going to try and zoom in appropriately on this very tiny image.
Thank you. I'm using a mind map, also having voice problems apparently. And that's interesting. It's provocative to use a mind map, but it has some deficits. Anyway, I used to begin my class with an apology. I would say, I'm really sorry this textbook is so expensive. And I would also kind of say, I don't know why we're using a textbook. It seems like everyone is doing it. And it seems like the textbook doesn't represent the field. It limits the scope of the field in ways that minimize provocative inquiry. So I would have lots of apologies. I heard that the internet offered options and that there were many movements emerging in that context. And it reminded me of my college experience in which a group of progressive faculty at Michigan created something called the Program in Education for Social Change and actually invited people off the streets in their classes. I thought, can we limit the walls that diminish people's access to knowledge as we approach our classes differently? And can we dethrone the textbook? The textbooks in the courses I teach tend to be particularly limiting because I don't want a text focused on an official perspective on a discipline. I want something which is a door to alternative perspectives, invites people's criticism and inquiry. So I began to think about a course platform as a Klein bottle, which is a funny idea from topology based on the notion of a media strip. The idea that if you have one strip of paper and connect it in a way by turning it over, it becomes one single facet that goes up and down throughout the entire circumference of the media strip. And the 4th-dimensional version of that is the Klein bottle, which is this weird thing in which you have a bag or box and the entire universe is both inside and outside the box. So I thought, can we create a course which is not really a contained vessel, but is an opening to the larger universe and permits dialogue and interaction and critical analysis, while at the same time, in the world of the internet, not creating the rabbit hole, which is an opportunity to lose oneself in competing philosophies based upon disinformation. Way back in the 90s, we were already talking about information literacy facing the opportunities as well as the perils of the internet. And in devising open alternatives for courses, can we create an open garden that is at the same time has a layer of validation analysis? So not merely a rabbit hole, but a Klein bottle with the universe represented inside. There are people who can order Klein bottles. They can't really do it because it's a 4-dimensional thing. But in case you're interested in minotaurs and other imaginary beasts, you might look at this. So it can't exist in 3 dimensions. But the idea of a course that is kind of coextensive with the world. I've got it here someplace. That's possible. We can change the nature of boundaries. The open course exists without boundaries in the same sense that we proposed the notion of schools without walls in previous years. So my vision is of a course that's a Klein bottle, a portal that transparently connects the local course to a universe of information and empowers the student as critic and validator. So that means, of course, looking at the wonderful resources for finding open source resources and connecting them in a way that enhances the student's critical analysis rather than merely substituting some other bad text for a good text. It means, I think, opening up the course to a kind of inquiry with the environment. And it transforms the syllabus into a living document that obviously can be reached by students outside of institution. I don't know what the fears or the strictures of the university, but as an educator, for me, ideally, I would love to have a syllabus for business ethics that could be examined by others and used by them, and students under the guidance of an instructor might pick and choose and remix the resources in the syllabus, find them linked in the open resource repositories, and find themselves very much enriched by those opportunities. So the syllabus becomes a very different kind of document. When I was in graduate school, I had a great professor who developed extraordinary lectures that changed my life, but he also didn't want anyone to borrow from them or to record them. He stopped a student who had a tape recorder. He was very protective of his property. And while I don't want to lose my own property, I want people to have